Ballpark or not?
What's your answer? I didn't answer. Did you answer the world history?
Yeah.
What was it?
It was like the total. It was
131.
36,631.
That number I don't get what he's asking. Like, how many total chemicals? That's the number? Yeah, that. No, I need to see that.
Raise your hand if you need more time.
2 I don't know what it is.
Are we comparing the numbers in that No, it's half.
It's 22446.
Here we go. I'm assuming you've done the math.
0 2244.
You recorded yesterday's date somewhere. You know the hourly. You know how many hours it's been since yesterday. If you want to make a prediction, my hunch is it's been almost exactly 24 hours since yesterday. Give or take about 5% of an hour.
Wait, so since yesterday there's 2 million.
And here we go.
I am confused. I'm off by 1,000.
How many of you were within 1,000? Give or take 1,000. How many of you were give or take 2,000? How many of you were give or take 3,000? How many of you had a margin greater than 3,000 of error? How many of you still haven't completed the warm-up?
Well, it's only 1,000.
How many of you had some sort of conversation with someone outside this population here regarding world population, population growth, the size of cities, and would anybody be interested to share the conversation or the outcomes of that conversation?
I was talking over break with my grandma about the population in India and how it's rising, about that, but that's pretty much just what we watched in the movie yesterday.
I was talking to my dad about like how we're gonna have to maybe go to another planet for planet with resources. And I watched the movie Interstellar, and I was kind of like that. So.
What did your dad think? Likely or not likely?
He thought likely. I mean, because there's already like that SpaceX thing going on. I think it's kind of like it too.
And Gabby, did you raise your hand too, or no?
Well, my mom is at 2 a.m. fertility baby and stuff.
You told me about that.
Huh?
You told me about that.
Yeah, I just said she.
Sorry about that.
No, that's a fine profession. What could I possibly say?
So she was telling me how her friend in college went to India, or either India or China, and she was interning at a hospital when she was in college, and they said that the babies being born, if they're a girl, they just throw them in a trash can.
No, they did.
Yeah, they did.
No.
Okay. they would just throw the girls in the trash can.
They wouldn't just throw them live in the trash can.
I mean, stuff like that happens a lot. Like
I find that very hard to believe.
I don't know about impossible stuff.
Yeah,
I feel like it'd be more likely if it happens.
Even if she believes it, I find it hard to believe. You see there's reports all over the internet about people disposing of baby girls and shit.
Well, no, that's a real thing.
That's a real thing.
With the one child. But I don't know if possible.
That's so heavy.
A baby?
It's pretty light, actually. You know?
That's all the
Get like a punch. You know that your birth weight is apparently correlated to your earning potential?
No way.
Oh,
No.
yeah.
I was happy about
You'll be rich.
I was 5 pounds.
You're going to be broke. You have no hope.
I was being double.
Your life's over.
Yeah, exactly. You gave up already. Yeah. What? I guess it depends what your parents were eating. I don't know. All right, children.
How about your weight now?
5'9".
Does anybody know where you left off in the media?
12 minutes. 12 minutes.
Take out your notes from yesterday and your study guide. Mal, can you please hit the light switch? We will probably watch the entire period.
We can't see the questions. I can.
I'll get down.
Yeah, that's it.
Somebody said 12 minutes? Here we go.
Marrying the world at large is under 25 and reaching reproductive age. If couples in this generation have only 2 children, in effect replacing themselves, population growth will soon halt. Yet for Manisha, it's far from clear if India's youth will follow this radical trend and throw off the shackles of tradition. As they pose for their portraits, she asks them how many children they want, if the gender matters, and how they feel about birth control.
A lot of the couples said that they'd be happy with 2 children. And we said, what gender? They said, it doesn't matter. It's very nice of them to say. 10 years ago, people wouldn't have even said it. But I'm not really sure that that would happen in household if there were just 2 daughters.
Daughters are seen as an economic liability because parents must provide a dowry of cash or gifts to marry them off. A common Hindu wedding blessing prays that a wife will bear 8 sons. But if she doesn't have any, it could be a price to pay. And that's why Manisha tries to intervene early. The most shocking proof of what can go wrong are the brides who've been doused in kerosene and set ablaze by angry in-laws or husbands. An estimated 25,000 women are killed or maimed each year over dowry and domestic disputes, or even their failure to produce a son.
Bride burning is common in India, and since women are so dispensable, and these young little girls, between the age of 15 to 24, are the most vulnerable. Girls would get burned, they would get poisoned, and so therefore a girl in the husband's house, at least for the first 10 or 15 years, always walks on a tightrope.
Gender discrimination takes place even among the wealthy. Upper-class parents committed to a 2-child family have sonograms to make sure they've conceived a son. Although this doctor refuses to reveal a fetus's sex, not everyone is as ethical. Millions of females are aborted, leaving India with 35 million fewer women than men.
There was an article saying that better dead than burnt. Okay, meaning that it's better that you have sex determination rather than be burnt in your in-laws' household. And the newspaper asked me to write a rejoinder, and I wrote a rejoinder saying neither dead nor burnt.
India wants to reduce population growth, but it certainly doesn't want to reduce it through sex-selective abortion. In fact, it is actually illegal now to test to see what the gender of a fetus is. But I think the single most important thing India can do today, demographically, is to somehow make the birth of a girl child as welcome as the birth of a boy child. Because the goal of most developing countries is to reach this magical 2-child family.
Abidi Shah, a social worker, has seen that when women have greater access to education and job training, their status rises. 16 years ago, she visited a village on the outskirts of New Delhi. Dismayed by the plight of young girls there, she decided to act.
There wasn't any sense among the girls of the adolescence because they had lost their childhood already. They had to look after their younger brother and sister. They had to cook the food. They had to clean the house. They had to fetch the drinking water. No education for them. No food for them. No clothing for them.
First, Abidi convinced a skeptical community to let her teach vocational and health classes to adolescent girls. Next, she had to show the girls themselves how education could improve their lives.
I just said, do you want same life as you are living here? They said, no, I want better life. What sort of life you want? The life I see on the TV. The life you are living. So I said, then what will we do? We can't do anything. That's our luck. That's our destiny. I said, no, this is not your destiny. You can change your life.
One young woman who attended the program was Bimla. At age 13, her father had arranged her marriage and forced her to drop out of school.
I already had 2 daughters when Abidi arrived at our house. She saw that I was hungry and exhausted, and she asked me, why don't you use birth control? I didn't know anything about it, but I knew I didn't want any more children.
Bimla was just the kind of girl Abidi wanted to reach. She told Bimla that she could legally use the pill, even without her family's permission.
I was talking with my friend, and my mother-in-law was listening from behind the door. As soon as she left, my mother-in-law started yelling, "You must have a son! Stop taking your pills." Although she tried to beat me into submission, I was sure I didn't want any more children. I could see that large families were often poorer. Their children didn't have clothes to wear or food to eat, but they played in the dirt, and they didn't get an education.
With help from Abidi, Bimla learned tailoring. Soon, she had enough money to help her husband buy a new house and send their children to school.
The reality in India is that many women are very empowered, but the majority are disempowered. So when women want to change the way their roles are defined, they cannot do that if they're economically vulnerable and dependent. Because the price then is that if you're left destitute, if you're abandoned, if you're thrown out of the house, you have no way to survive if you have no income. So I strongly believe that one way forward to increase the momentum of social and cultural change is to allow women to have employment opportunities.
Yet these opportunities may be hard to come by, even as change sweeps across India. To keep pace with its growing population, the country must create 6 million new jobs a year. But even its dazzling economic growth of 8% is not enough to prevent unemployment, already widespread, from rising. And a new problem is looming, as population pressures confront vast numbers of towns and villages with chronic water shortages.
In India, water tables are now falling in most states, including the Punjab, which is the breadbasket of India. And this is making it more difficult to expand food production at a time when population is projected to grow by another 500 million by 2050.
India faces really huge environmental problems from rapid population growth. It might have a hard time growing enough food for itself. On the other hand, it's becoming a center of software. So if it makes a transition to becoming more of a high-tech,
knowledge-based society, then it probably could feed itself. It has huge numbers of very smart, well-educated people.
So we have got such a large number of intellectuals in every field that you cannot write off India and say, oh, population growth will finish this country, will be doomed, there will be no drinking water, no housing, no nothing, no jobs. Absolutely unreal, unscientific, it is drama.
India is poised on a knife edge. Headed in the right direction, it will still take years to reach the coveted two-child family. And what if the average family size turns out to be slightly more?
Suppose in India they really did achieve 2 children per couple in, let's say, 15 years. Then they would rise to about 1.6 billion by 2050. But the key is, if couples have, say, on average, about 2.5 children, India would get its 2nd billion by the middle of this century.
And the same is true for the world. If global fertility stays even slightly above this magical 2-child number, by mid-century our population could nearly double, from 6 to 11 billion.
We're dealing with unprecedented numbers in terms of their magnitude, and the result could be huge rates of unemployment, great political instability, strife, and a complete unraveling of economy and society. And human ingenuity may well find a way to deal with these numbers. It has in the past. Human ingenuity is wonderful, but it's also, like demographics, highly uncertain.
Around the world in Japan, the population is curving in the opposite direction of India's. 300 children once studied here in the elementary school of Oguchi. But once this lone 5th grader graduates, no new students will fill his place because of a startling decline in birth rates.
Never before in human history has fertility fallen so far, so fast, so deep, and so unexpectedly. And no one should doubt that it is a revolutionary change.
If you go back and you look in the 1960s, there are all these horrendous titles of books, like The Population Bomb, but many more, and you find out that the primary source of concern in intellectual circles about population was, and in some places continues to be, the population explosion. And all of the industrial countries are overreaction, potentially, to this concern. Now has left us with just the opposite problem.
With crowded streets and packed trains, Japan hardly seems to be in need of any more people. But if fertility stays at its low rate of 1.3 children per woman, by the end of the century, Japan's population of 126 million will shrink in half. The impending decline has become a national crisis, with blame targeted against the soaring numbers of unmarried youth. Called parasite singles, they live with their parents while pursuing careers and other interests besides marriage.
Japanese women in the 70s felt that 25 was your last chance to get married. If you were 26, you'd be a Christmas cake, because December 25th is the last day when a Christmas cake can be sold, and after that, your leftovers. Now, a woman will often delay marriage until, the last possible time before she can have her first child. This is now seen by some as a kind of female selfishness. But I think women, in general, are trying to do different things with their lives.
Tomoko Omuro is a leading television journalist. At age 29, she became one of Japan's first female anchors.
I think there are 2 doors for women. One door has a letter for promotion, and the other one doesn't really have anything, and you just stay on the same level forever.
And lots of women end up taking coffees and serving tea. And I didn't want to have that kind of work. And I was looking for a good lifetime career.
By age 37, Tomoko had become an editor-in-chief, supervising a team of producers and reporters. Her husband of 9 years often asked her when they might start a family.
Many companies in Japan still consider women with children as a burden. So I was so scared to have a baby because I thought I would just drop out of the race. So I kept on just postponing it. But when I turned 37 or so, I started feeling like, I don't know, something was missing in my life.
At 41, Tomoko gave birth to their daughter, Asumi. Her initial ambivalence about motherhood is becoming increasingly common.
When I get married, it might be better to have kids, but I don't worry about it.
If I get married, I might think about having kids in my 30s.
If I'm working, I can live on my own. In the older times, marrying for Japanese women was like a dependency. It's not like that anymore.
But besides wanting careers, there's another crucial reason that more women are working.
In Japan, the economy since 89, 90 has been in a recession. Japanese women often have to work to keep their families middle class. One income doesn't work for many families, especially in terms of the cost of children's education. It's an exceptionally expensive task to raise a successful child in Japan.
There's a saying that Japanese men live at the office and commute to home, often catching the last train at midnight. Now, as more women join their husbands at work, they're discovering that the long hours required by most employers make having a family, certainly a large one, difficult. For Tomoko, it was a tough challenge to find a daycare center that could look after Asumi for 13 hours a day, given the unpredictable hours of the newsroom. For 6 months, her mother moved to Tokyo to help. Now that she's gone, Tomoko agonizes at the thought that her daughter may be asleep by the time she's picked up.
If you are an executive, you can't say, well, it's 5 o'clock, I'm leaving. If there's work, you have to complete your work. Right now, I'm trying to figure out how to work with my full ability and at the same time just save the time for my baby. My husband, I know he's busy, maybe busier than I am. Japanese people tend to work for long hours, and unless we change that kind of idea, the declining birth rate is going to continue.
Three hours from Tokyo, near the elementary school of Oguchi, one can glimpse the flip side of the country's falling birth rates. By 2050, 1 in 3 Japanese will be over the age of 65. In Oguchi, this is already the reality. Mr. and Mrs. Ono's house was once packed with 3 generations. But since their parents died and their children left for careers in the city, life for this 80-year-old couple has become lonelier.
In the old times, it was normal for a daughter-in-law to look after her in-laws. So that's why I took care of my father-in-law until he died at 83.
Our children have grown up and gone to live in Tokyo. They've all gotten married and have to worry about sending their children to school. That's their place now. They have to work, and they can't afford to come back here and look after us.
The governmental query now is who cares for our elders? In essence, though, the government really feels that families are responsible and society isn't. And ultimately, when you say family, you mean woman.
But with more women working, there's often no one at home to care for the elderly. The stress on families is mounting, especially since neither the government nor private industry have been able to fill the gap. If the owner should get sick, the only nearby nursing home is full. To ensure their security in old age, the Onos had counted on profits from their forest. But as globalization brought in cheap timber from the Philippines, they were unable to sell their trees.
I can't depend on my children, so I don't know what to do. It would be great if the government builds lots of nursing homes and takes care of us. But I don't have high expectations. Staying healthy is the best thing, but we can't stay healthy forever.
Japan's population pyramid looks like India's turned upside down, reflecting how the elderly dramatically outnumber the young.
How many of you find that flute music a little bit annoying, by the way? I think, like, since some of you are considering a career in media, I challenge you to rethink the stereotypic sound palette. Like, if there's like an Indian on the screen, there will be like the chanting, drumming music with like a howling wolf. And then it's like, if they're talking about Japan, it must be that one flute riff. My brother is like a really well-educated global music expert, and he plays me the most shocking music every time I'm at his house. And I'm always surprised, like, oh, there's other music in Japan. Wow, go figure. Japan has like rad electronic music, like blow your mind. Anyway, and if you watch like artsy Japanese movies, they don't have like that flute music. Like, why must we? Whatever. Look at that age structure. I want you to think about something. They mentioned it before. You already took this. You already saw this video in another class, so I'll do it quickly. But one thing I want you to imagine: which of those layers, the old, the middle, or the young, is responsible for the gross majority of economic activity? The middle. They're the ones that do the working. They're the ones that take out the loans. They're the ones that do the shopping and the spending. As all of those elders have been replaced by a shrinking population, imagine that business activity has shrunk, the workforce has shrunk, and thus so has the tax base, and thus so has the power and potential of government. But look at the growing numbers of retirees, those very people that require the most government attention. You've got less and less people paying taxes every day, and more people needing the benefit of those taxes every day. In other words, more and more people who need government services, and less people to pay for those services. Japan's economy has been struggling with that. Your generation is slipping into this right now. So right as you enter the workforce, you'll have America for the first time in that shape. And imagine what that does for the economy. There are so many ways to interpret age structures. We'll talk more about this later. But remember the economic read on these.
The Japanese now live longer than anyone else, with men averaging 78 years and women 84.
And with increasing education, we find that disability rates among the elderly have been dropping steadily. That is fabulously good news. It's a revolution in human demography. It means that people of 60 have the function of people of 40 at the beginning of the century.
But this good news is tempered by its sobering reality in aging countries. There will soon not be enough young people entering the workforce to support those retiring. Not only will there be fewer workers, but as the population declines, there will be fewer consumers.
It's going to be extremely hard for businesses to make a profit. When businesses don't make a profit, they don't pay taxes. And when taxes don't get paid, you can't support the welfare state. And so the older countries face such a huge problem financially that they really could undermine the global economy.
To keep its workforce from shrinking, an aging country like Japan would need to take in 600,000 immigrants a year. Yet the Japanese resist, obsessed by preserving their own ethnicity. In stark contrast, America's workforce continues to grow as a result of immigration.
American fertility has been below replacement for about 35 years, but just barely below. But we take in about 1 million immigrants a year, and in the next 50 years, they and their children are going to help America grow by about 100 million people. So we will be the only one of the modern countries that will be growing, and growing substantially.
Did you guys hear that? That our country's actually shrinking?
I heard it.
If not for our managed, also known as legal or documented immigration, our natural population is actually in decline. We have one of those shapes with less than replacement birth rates. This is one of the reasons that we get so careful about our managed and regulated immigration.
The United States is now the third most populous nation, and will remain so for the next 50 years, as our numbers climb from around 300 to 400 million people. Economically, this growth keeps us vibrant. Yet our productive economy also uses more resources than any other nation, and generates 1/4 of the greenhouse gases contributing to global warming. In fact, an American child will consume and pollute more over a lifetime than 30 children born in India. Although population growth is delaying aging in the U.S., our ranks of seniors will also increase as the baby boom generation, 1 in 4 Americans, retires.
No other country will see as large a percentage increase in the elder population as the United States will, because our baby boom is larger than anybody else's. And yet we will continue to have lots and lots of young people to support them. Not enough to keep Social Security solvent, but certainly enough to make us younger compared to the other developed countries.
Across the industrialized world, the average family size is now at or below 2 children. This stunning change has slowed population growth, yet it also signals the advent of global aging. Confronted by the prospect of shrinking populations, many countries now encourage couples to have more children. Ironically, they're finding that it may be easier to cut fertility than it is to raise it. A startling demographic divide now confronts us. as older societies shrink in age, while youthful ones reel from rapid growth. Nowhere is the contrast starker than in sub-Saharan Africa. With families averaging around 6 children each, it's one of the fastest growing regions in the world, despite high death rates from AIDS.
AIDS mortality is actually having a huge effect on population size. Nevertheless, the age structure in sub-Saharan Africa is so young that there will be so many people that still need to pass through the reproductive ages that sub-Saharan Africa, even if it put the brakes absolutely today on fertility rates, its population would nearly double over this century.
In 1950, sub-Saharan Africa had 1/3 as many people as Europe. By 2050, this African population will be triple the size of Europe's.
Rapid population growth poses a real challenge to nations. Its taxes, the educational system, their infrastructures, their health system. So as a whole, it becomes a heavy burden on an economy and a governmental system that is not strong enough.
And what does it mean for these countries? It means falling per capita incomes. It means deteriorating social services, and it means conflict. And these will create tremendous pressures to emigrate.
Africa's population pressures will not just create economic refugees, but environmental ones as well. To meet rising demands for food, fuel, and shelter, the continent's forests are disappearing at the fastest rate in the world. As countries struggle to obtain a decent standard of living, natural environments are increasingly strained. The degradation not only threatens Africa's unique wildlife, but creates hardships for people who live off the land.
Roughly 1/3 of the people in the world still earn their living not on a job, but by growing things or catching them or picking them up off the ground. So if those ecosystems go down, those people are in very bad shape. And so that's the real risk, is that we're going to degrade ecosystems past the point where they can sustain life as we know it.
Many African states have now embraced family planning. One of the oldest and most successful programs is in Kenya. In the 70s and 80s, this East African nation was the poster child for runaway growth. But 2 decades of family planning cut fertility from around 7 to 4 children per woman.
The number of children per woman has dropped dramatically, partly as a result of their individual choices and partly because people have thought to provide reproductive health services to make it possible for them.
According to demographic models, Kenya's falling fertility places it on the threshold of a profound transition. All countries start in stage 1.
Super mega warning. One of the key issues in this unit, this is 3 stars right here. This is guaranteed to be on the AP test. This is probably 2% of the testable points on every AP test. What? We are talking about, wait, some of you already know, because you may have been in human geography or just seen this elsewhere in your lives.
I think we learned about it in biology last week.
AP Bio teaches this. CP Bio or
CP Bio too, yeah.
CP Bio, I'm happy to hear about this, did not know that.
It's the work.
If you know this, you know this, but heads up, I'm going to play this twice. I'm going to play it and then replay it. And we have like a whole lecture about it coming up, because it's super critical in this class. There will be many details following.
Where high death rates from disease make high birth rates a necessity.
That's
to
stage
keep the
1.
population from being decimated.
But then, as modernization begins, the death rate falls, but the birth rate does not. So you have a large excess of births over deaths and the so-called population explosion.
The challenge for every country is to pass rapidly through this second stage and bring birth rates back into balance with death rates, allowing the population to stabilize.
Because if countries can't get through that stage quickly, then the pressures of population growth may begin to undermine their prospects of breaking out. And if they don't break out, then chances are that eventually things will start breaking down.
Just as Kenya stands ready to reap the benefits of falling birth rates,
how many of you have seen this and you think you get the whole 3 stages concept of high birth and death rates? And how many of you would like me to replay that again, knowing that it's super critical and it might not hurt to have one of
the countries?
3 stages, 1, 2, 3.
Of a profound
Stage 1, you have high birth and death rates, because, you know, it's a crappy place to live. So you have to have a lot of babies, because a lot of them die. Crappy place, you know, high death rates. Just so you know, death rates are what we call plastic. They are flexible. It's easy to lower the death rate. You sprinkle some food and water on a starving population, and go figure, death rate's pretty easy to fix. Doesn't take much, actually, to lower death rates. Globally, it's like a really easy thing to fix. Little medical help sometimes. Usually just food and water is all it takes. And death rates drop quickly, overnight. You can go to a population where 20% of people are going to die that day, sprinkle some food and water, and 99% of those are going to live. It's really simple. Death rates drop right away. Birth rates, however, are not flexible. People don't stop having babies just because somehow death rates are changing. Birth rates are cultural. They are entrenched. They are not flexible. They are not plastic. They are not responsive. You're almost guaranteed to have the same number of children as your parents had. The majority of you will have the same number of parents. Sorry, the majority of you will have the same number of children as your grandparents did. Because birth rates are a cultural, religious, traditional, deeply rooted thing. So, death rates go down, birth rates stay high, population is growing, and the challenge is the 3rd stage, where nations have to figure out how to push birth rates down, and that's not easy because those are not flexible. Shifting cultures is challenging.
All countries start in stage 1, where high death rates from disease make high birth rates a necessity to keep a population from being decimated.
But then, as modernization begins, the death rate falls, but the birth rate does not. So you have a large excess of births over deaths and the so-called population explosion.
The challenge for every country is to pass rapidly through the 2nd stage and bring birth rates back into balance with death rates, allowing the population to stabilize.
Because if countries can't get through that stage quickly, then the pressures of population growth may begin to undermine their prospects of breaking out. And if they don't break out, then chances are that eventually things will start breaking down.
Just as Kenya stands ready to reap the benefits of falling birth rates, the country is facing a stunning demographic reversal. For the first time in modern history, death rates are rising, not falling. 6 to 9% of all Kenyans are infected with HIV/AIDS, causing life expectancy to plummet from 65 to 49 years. In Kenya, AIDS and population growth have become tragically linked. Nowhere is this more evident than in the slums of Nairobi. Here, 21-year-old Florence Akimwe lives with her relatives in a one-room corrugated shack. What's surprising about her family is that all 6 members are orphans.
Check out how utterly sad and heartbreaking this woman's story is, and when she talks, like, look at how her face is so, like, projecting of, like, confidence and positivity and stuff. I find this like totally heart-wrenching. I mean, I hate everybody I know.
At 16, Florence was thrust into taking care of her 4 younger siblings after their parents died of AIDS. Then, the disease killed her sister, and Florence took in her 3-year-old nephew.
In fact, at times I always feel that it is a lot of burden, but because I knew there is no one to take care of them, I have just to do it now.
Florence dropped out of school and searched for ways to support her family. But with few skills, her options were bleak.
What happens with these young women when they are forced to drop out of school, very often with very basic elementary education, they wind up on the streets and they sell their bodies in order to fend for themselves. It is not uncommon to find that young women have had sex with older men for something as simple as a meal, something as simple as a bag of what we call chips.
I always feel so bad because in order to get money from the sugar daddies, you have to sleep with them, and they pay you more when you don't use the condom. And I needed money to survive.
Eventually, Florence had to break the news to her family that she too was infected with the deadly HIV virus. With treatment beyond her family's means, her plight echoes a death sentence ringing across sub-Saharan Africa. Adults between the ages of 20 and 60 are being wiped out, contorting the population pyramids of countries ravaged by AIDS into a haunting shape, with large numbers of children at the base, disappearing adults in the middle, and the few surviving seniors on top.
AIDS is cutting a huge swath through Sub-Saharan Africa's strongest resources. It's people. It's working-age people. And that is imposing a huge burden in those countries. There are currently 11 million orphans in Sub-Saharan Africa. Never before in history have we seen such a colossal burden as the number of orphans that will overwhelm the capacity of the usual social institutions that we have to deal with them.
Africa is living in an utter catastrophe right now. Millions and millions of people dying of preventable and treatable disease. Millions of children becoming orphaned. Impoverished people can't face these challenges on their own.
Today, the epidemic is spreading fastest among women. In fact, an African woman's greatest chance for getting infected is within marriage, where condoms are rarely used when families are hoping for children.
Right now, a woman has to make a choice between having a child or putting herself at risk of HIV infection. And because of that, it is clear that a prevention strategy for them is crucial.
There may soon be a breakthrough that will save women's lives. At the Population Council in New York City, scientists have discovered compounds that prevent the HIV virus from infecting human cells. Called microbicides, the hope is that they will chemically block or kill the virus during intercourse. The goal is to develop a vaginal gel that can protect women from disease if their partners fail to wear a condom.
Some of these products may also have the ability to be contraceptive, but I think the main issue is that a woman has control over its use. She can decide when to use it.
As we've seen in the family planning world, it is women who primarily take responsibility for protection. And if microbicides were actually then made available to women, even if they were 60% efficacious, not 100% efficacious, even 60% efficacious, they could avert millions of infections.
In several sub-Saharan African countries, AIDS has reversed population growth. But in most, births far exceed deaths, partly because only 19% of women here use birth control, in contrast to 61% of women worldwide. Although more young people than ever will need family planning, funding has not kept pace. To complicate matters, the United States has blocked support to clinics offering abortion-related care or counseling, even if U.S. funds are not used for these services.
You didn't hear that? Our government won't provide funding to places that offer abortion, even if our funds aren't used for that. If it's merely a part of their healthcare palette, we will not send them money. And just so you know, that changes. I was outraged when I saw that, like, one particular politician had done that. I snapped and started doing all this Googling to find out more information. And I realized that every president for the last 4 or 5 has gone back and forth. Even though it's legal in this country, you can't change that. But if you get a conservative president, they will block funding of any place that supports it elsewhere internationally. And by the way, whenever a liberal is elected, they do the opposite, and they recover, or they restore funding.
Did Obama restore funding after Bush?
Yeah, so Obama restored funding in the first month in office. Bush blocked funding in his first days in office. Before him, Bill Clinton restored funding. Before him, Bush 1 blocked funding too. Yeah.
Is it illegal,
What? Are abortions legal in this country? Yes, they are legal. Yes, it's been legal since Roe versus Wade, early 70s, I believe. You know, the conservative religious constituents believe that it should not be legal. Of course, you can't overturn the Supreme Court. So when our Supreme Court says the Constitution protects your rights, you can't take them away. But it is possible for a president to block abortion services elsewhere, internationally.
As a result, many have closed.
It is a tragedy because birth rates are not coming down just on their own. They're coming down because women are accessing family planning services. And when women can use contraception, they do not need to have abortions.
The toll of unwanted pregnancy can be seen in the wards of Kenyatta National Hospital. Half of all adolescent girls in the country bear children by age 19. Many don't have the means to care for their babies and attempt illegal abortions.
We've heard of young women using coat hangers, knitting needles, detergent, overdosing on anti-malarial medication. By the time the young women show up at a public health facility, very often they're bleeding, they're septic, and they're traumatized.
But the doctors here stress that there's an obvious solution to this problem.
Let's look at adolescent pregnancy. Let's look at abortion. And let's look at AIDS. The reason why we say this is the common denominator there is unsafe sex. And this sexual activity is occurring in the absence of accurate and reliable information and in the absence of services that would enable them deal with the consequences.
And we know that there is unmet need for family planning and that this will only grow. Add to this the fact that you now have more and more young people entering their reproductive years, and you can see that they're sitting on a time bomb.
In contrast to most African nations, Kenya has started its demographic transition. Its fertility rates have fallen to around 4 children per woman, although not yet as low as India's average of 3. With fewer babies being born, a changing age structure has opened up a rare window of opportunity for both countries.
India and Kenya have a huge population that's just getting ready to enter the labor force, the prime working years, the prime reproductive years. If India and Kenya can keep fertility down, those resources that would have otherwise gone to children can be devoted to building up the productive capacity of the economy.
This strategy transformed the once poor nations of South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. As fertility fell, these governments took money once spent on children and created jobs for young adults entering the workforce.
I'm going to try to replay that last 30 seconds because this is sort of a critical issue here too. I know that everybody's getting kind of sleepy, so I thought I'd highlight. Okay.
India and Kenya have a huge population that's just getting ready to enter the labor force, the prime working years, the prime reproductive years. If India and Kenya can keep fertility down, those resources that would have otherwise gone to children can be devoted to building up the productive capacity of the economy.
This strategy transformed the once poor nations of South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. As fertility fell, these governments took money once spent on children and created jobs for young adults entering the workforce. The economic gains of these Asian tigers stunned the world.
Economic growth in East Asia was not miraculous at all. It was fundamentally a demographic phenomenon. And it's a demographic phenomenon that can be repeated in other countries like India and Kenya. If they keep fertility down and invest in their young, working-age people, India and Kenya have an opportunity to escape the poverty trap that has ensnared them for centuries.
It took until 1800 for global population to reach its first billion. In 2 centuries, the numbers increased sixfold. Our world is now headed towards a day of reckoning. If fertility drops just below 2 children, by mid-century, global population could stabilize at around 9 billion people.
The key is the education and really the liberation of women. When women have more control